I was 16 years old and I was playing goalkeeper for my indoor soccer team. And I got scored on. And it was a pretty bad shot. I probably should have saved it, and it just went right past me. So I was a little upset about it, but whatever. And then about 5 minutes later, like same exact play, same exact thing, same person scores on me again. An awful goal. And so I turn around, and I punch the wall as hard as I can. And I didn't really think anything of it. Finished the game. A week went by, and my hand was just swollen up like a potato or something. And eventually went to the doctor, found out that I had dislocated all these back knuckles right here and had a boxer's fracture. Ended up missing my junior year of high school baseball and taking my ACT and SAT in a cast. It's a lot of handwriting essays and a pretty miserable experience, but luckily I learned from that. Okay, and so a couple years later, I was senior in high school, had just ended my first experiment in long-term romance, my first girlfriend, which experiment was not super successful for anyone, but that's another story. And I was kind of still messing with her and her new boyfriend and just giving them a hard time. And anyway, one night, her new boyfriend came over to my house and was looking for a fight. And much to my surprise, he gave me one. And so we got in this kind of fight, and neither of us knew what we were doing. It was just so awkward, shoving and swinging around. And I walk inside and my arm's kind of stuck up here and try to put it down. Won't go down. So I ended up in the emergency room at 3 a.m. with a dislocated shoulder. I had a doctor, he tied a rope around my torso on this side, and then 2 nurses grabbed my arm on that side, pulling me apart so that they could separate my shoulder and pop it back in place. And I spent my summer after my senior year of high school in a sling. So, what do these stories have in common? Right? What's the pattern here? What's going on besides me being an idiot? but that's really it. So this is what we're trying to get at with these stories. If I'm so smart, why was I so dumb? And that's real, because look, on paper, even at the time, I had a 4.5 GPA or something, because in my high school, if you took AP classes, you could get extra credit. I was the top of my class. I got a 35 on my ACT. So I'm really smart. I'm very intelligent. How can I be so intelligent and still be so stupid? And that's a question that my mom and dad asked me a lot during these days of life. And I finally, after years of studying happiness, who would have thought? I think I figured out the answer. And that's because there are different types of intelligences. And what those stories have in common is not a lack of maybe intellectual intelligence, more so a lack of emotional intelligence. See, if you think about IQ, you have its counterpart known as EQ, which is emotional intelligence. And that's what this video is about. Now, again, I have a little bit of background on this, as you know now from my personal experience, but also my last few years studying positive psychology and particularly mindfulness. Turns out, and you'll learn about this in the video, mindfulness training and awareness is very closely tied to emotional intelligence. In fact, there's a course at Google called Search Inside Yourself. And it's Google's probably their most popular course. It's been in the media, it's gotten all this attention, and my meditation teacher, one of my teachers, actually helped to develop the course. His name's Norman Fisher. And so I've now had a lot of experience in some of these mindfulness trainings, and particularly this idea of emotional intelligence. So my takeaway from this video is that I want you to start training your emotional intelligence. And the way that you're going to train it is mainly through mindfulness, but there's some other practices we'll share. In order to convince you to get started on this, I'm going to share why this is so important for both your happiness and your performance and your career as a leader. I'll share a little bit of the science and explanation of what is emotional intelligence, and then we'll share some actual practices and habits that you can develop to improve your emotional intelligence. So let's start with understanding, why is emotional intelligence so important to not only leadership, but really your quality of life as a whole? And we're going to do one of my favorite little activities, and I usually do this at live training events, but we can kind of do it on video here and have some fun. I call it my crystal ball exercise. So we're going to do, so here's my crystal ball. Inflation is hitting everyone hard right now, so this is sort of what we're working with here. I think it lights up. Maybe not. It was pretty cheap. So, all right, we've got our crystal ball here, our budget crystal ball, a few dollars from Target. Actually a great investment, because I'm going to be able to do a psychic reading of you right now. And at this point you're like, Jackson, this is supposed to be like a positive psychology and leadership course, very serious. What are you doing here with this reading? But I promise you, I'm going to nail it. And I'm going to, after you get my answer, you'll understand why I'm doing this, and you'll understand that how this applies to pretty much everyone you know and the people you work with every single day. So I'm going to tell you what you value. I'm going to tell you what you've been searching for your whole life. And when I do that, you'll know what everyone's looking for and what everyone values and what everyone's searching for. So my crystal ball is telling me that you want to have some person or people in your life that you can 100%, 1,000% absolutely, completely count on and trust. But more than just having someone trustworthy, you want them to be stable, competent, nice, friendly, understanding, supportive, and wise. You want them to care about you and to show that they care about you, to be able to communicate that. Am I right so far? Probably, but you know what else? I can take this little crystal ball a step further and say, it's telling me that if you think you've found someone like this, maybe you don't think they're the real deal. You're not sure. You don't want to be fooled. You don't want to be betrayed. You don't want to lose a friend or a business partner. And so you sort of want to feel them out, right? You kind of keep an eye on them. And over time, if they act in a way that shows these things, being trustworthy, being wise, supportive, kind, and caring, right? Because actions speak louder than words. So if they actually act that way and demonstrate it with their behavior, you're going to want them in your life. And if they don't, they're out of your life. How'd I do? Pretty good, right? This thing is a good investment. So here's your 30-second course on leadership. That's all it is for the rest of your life. You don't need to get an MBA for $100,000. You don't need to read a stack of books. You don't need to go to all these different seminars. All you do is take that list, right, that I just went through that's in your head. Right? You want someone who's trustworthy, who's supportive, who's stable, who's wise, who's caring and can communicate that they care. And just remember that that's what everyone else wants. And that is emotional intelligence, isn't it? So if you train yourself to be this way, people are going to want you in their lives, right? People cannot help but want to follow you, to work for you or work with you, and even die for you, right? Like, that's how important this is. I mean, if you think about the people in your life that you value, right, they tend to show all of those qualities. So this is really like a fundamental insight here to understanding why emotional intelligence is so important. And I'll go a step further now with a little more science, now that we did our little mystical exercise, and talk about some of the connections here to business. And there's a few articles I can reference. Look at Harvard Business Review publishes a lot on emotional intelligence, and generally tends to be the same message, that companies that actually invest in cultivating emotional intelligence and training in leadership outperform those who don't. So typically, Harvard publishes a lot on this, and typically the story is companies that invest in developing and training for emotional intelligence in their leadership outperform those who don't. The World Economic Forum in their top skills for future business leaders, emotional intelligence is always at the top or near the top of the list. And then finally, we can talk quickly about the story with Search Inside Yourself at Google. That's the program I mentioned earlier that my mentor and teacher helped to develop. And the way this started was a single engineer at Google was kind of interested in mindfulness, and he really actually, in his story, he talks about this. He wanted to create the conditions for world peace. That was kind of his lifelong mission. And what he realized was that if you want to do that, you have to align it with the incentives of the business world, right? The businesses and organizations want to be more effective, more productive, and they want to generate financial profit. He said, okay, so what if there's a way that can help people reduce suffering, promote peace, kindness, altruism, and help people and businesses to be more effective? And that's what he found was emotional intelligence. So he worked with Zen monks, meditation teachers, developed this curriculum at Google, and as I touched on before, very quickly became by far the most popular course at Google's history. There was so much demand for it, in fact, that he actually spun off a nonprofit, the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, that delivers this program and curriculum to other companies. SAP, the huge software company, they heard about this and did their own kind of version of this initiative and ended up doing the training with some 10,000 employees. And both of these, with these leading companies, they're on the cutting edge of progressive work practices, innovation, productivity. This emotional intelligence and mindfulness component absolutely flourished. Okay? So that's kind of the business and organizational outcome, but let's tie it also to your happiness. It'd be nice to be a little happier, right? I think that's reasonable. So over the last few years, again, studying happiness, I've come to find there is actually a scientific consensus about what really makes for a happy life. And it's not perfect. There are different things that matter to different people, but the bottom line, this comes from something called the Grant study at Harvard University, basically the longest running psychological study of its kind. It found that the quality of your relationships determines how happy you are and how long you live. So we have this answer, right? Science generally says, the quality of your relationships determine the quality of your life. But that begs a question, doesn't it? Well, what makes for quality relationships then? And again, that's where emotional intelligence comes in. Think about this. What makes for a bad relationship? Hopefully you don't have too many of those in your life, but a lack of communication, inability to control your emotions, kind of toxic negativity, pessimism, complaining, frustration, basically a lack of emotional intelligence. Again, emotional intelligence being your ability to identify emotions and control your response to them, and same thing, identify emotions in others and control how you respond to their emotions. And if you look at research by Shasta Nelson, friendship expert, she finds that friendship depends on consistency, intimacy, and vulnerability. And then if you look at another meta study that I found very interesting that basically analyzed like 129 data sets from I think 20 or 30 different laboratories, and it tried to tease out like what factors determine the quality and health of romantic relationships over time. And the big things that stood out were perceived partner appreciation, perceived partner commitment, partner satisfaction, and finally conflict. So how well do you deal with conflict? Right? All those things, same theme, emotional intelligence. Okay, so if you want to have better relationships, you need emotional intelligence, and then those relationships are going to help you to have a happier life. If you think about business, you need emotional intelligence to be a leader, to make people want to work with you and want to work for you, right? And then that's going to make you more successful. So I hope by now you have an appreciation for why emotional intelligent leadership is such a critical skill set. Now let's shift into what is emotional intelligence and share a little bit of the scientific background. So I'm going to go ahead and share this model. We can put that on the screen now. And this comes from Daniel Goleman, who was kind of a leading theorist for articulating this approach to emotional intelligence. And so you can think about the first step being awareness. Right? So you have awareness of yourself and awareness of others, the social relational. So the self-awareness, it's basically how well do you understand what's motivating you, your sense of confidence, and basically the emotions that are arising in your own mind. And then social awareness is empathy. Right? How do you perceive the emotions in others and within the organization as a whole? Then the second step is regulation. Right? So how well do you respond to your own emotions? If you think about like anger management, self-control, and then how well do you manage and regulate the social and relational side? So that's basically people skills. Right? Developing others, inspiring others, being able to influence and manage conflict. So this guide, we'll come back to it, but that's going to help us as we think about the how, which is the last part of this video. You're basically going to train within each of those boxes. So how do I improve my emotional intelligence? How do I improve my self-awareness, right? And my awareness of other? Well, that's mindfulness. Okay? That is training your awareness systematically through practices like meditation, through body scans, through even things like yoga, all of these things that are designed to cultivate the state of awareness and paying attention. Well then, what's the next thing that I can train in? Well, I can train in self-management, which is how do you actually control your physiology? How do you process negative emotions? And then relationship management, well, you can train in people skills too. What are the habits I can bring into my communication and leadership style that will make me more effective in dealing with the emotions of others? So you can go ahead and turn that graphic off. And before we jump into the how, let me share a little bit more on the neuroscience background of emotional intelligence. So this has a lot to do with our actual brains, how they're wired, and our whole nervous system. And it also relates to the fight or flight response. So here's how your brain works in basic terms. I don't have an fMRI machine here. But so you have the kind of prefrontal cortex where the thinking and the kind of more cognitive and planning the future, thinking about consequences part of your brain, right? Towards the center and kind of bottom of your brain, you have something called the amygdala, which you can almost think of as this very primitive brain. And so our brain's developed with layers. Right? So initially we had these kind of the amygdala, which is this instinctual, hardwired brain. It's very close to our central nervous system. It's at the bottom of the brainstem. And then as we developed, we kind of grew on top of it through evolution, these additional layers of complexity, where again, the most recent is this frontal cortex, where a lot of the kind of thinking type stuff happens. So when you are under threat, when you perceive a threat, the amygdala kind of takes over and it literally shuts off this upper part of your brain thinking, and you react before you even have time to think. And I guarantee you've experienced this, and you might not have known it, but if you were ever trying to cross the road and you saw something coming, or you were walking through your house at night and you thought you saw someone or something and you kind of jumped, or maybe you were about to step on a spider and you saw a spider, you know that you react before you even have time to think. Or even think about falling over, right? If you trip and you catch yourself. You don't trip and then start to think, oh wait, am I falling? I think I'm falling, I should probably By the time you do that, you'd be on the ground. Right? You instinctually react. And that's really great if you're being chased by a lion, or you're about to trip or see a spider. But it's not so great if the thing that is making you perceive a threat is your boss, or your colleague, or your wife, or husband, boyfriend, girlfriend, son, daughter, parent, right? Because you think they're a threat, and you shut off thinking and you react instinctually. So that's where most of our problems come from in this life. And that is where emotional intelligence comes in, is because by training this awareness and mindfulness component, you can actually learn to kind of pause a little bit and down-regulate the amygdala. And this actually comes from a study. This study was titled "The Neural Correlates of Attentional Expertise in Long-Term Meditation Practitioners." That's a bit of a mouthful, but it basically means they were studying brain activity of people who've done a lot of meditation. And what they find is they looked at amygdala activation, and basically there's this graph of the amount of time you spent meditating, right? And basically it's the more time you've spent meditating, the less reactive your amygdala is, right? So you're able to down-regulate that through these awareness trainings. Okay, so that is where emotional intelligence comes in at this kind of neuroscience level, or how good are you at paying attention so when that fight or flight response hits you, can sort of control your reaction. Okay. So that's what we'll get at for the last part of this video is, well, how can you train it? And again, we'll start with this awareness side, mindfulness. Mindfulness, you can think about Jon Kabat-Zinn, who is basically the individual who took these sort of different meditation and Zen and all these different kind of contemplative traditions and created the gold standard for the clinical application of these practices, which is known as mindfulness-based stress reduction. And he defines mindfulness as paying attention to the present moment on purpose, non-judgmentally. It's awareness. It's simple awareness of the present moment. And this can be trained through meditation practices. And one of the simplest ways to do this, particularly for emotional intelligence, is what I call the hello meditation. And this is something I actually worked with one of my first coaching clients on. He struggled with anger and actually almost ruined one of his relationship with his long-term girlfriend because of anger. And I taught him this exercise. You do it every day for 10 minutes in the morning. You simply say hello to whatever's arising in your consciousness, in your awareness. So you're sitting, and you might try this as you follow along with the video here. And just sit for a moment, think of yourself as meditating, and just take a deep breath, and just bring your awareness into your body and mind. Just internal shift. What's going on here? And as you do this, you can just say hello to thoughts or feelings. Oh, hello planning. That's a common one. You might be thinking about what you're going to have for lunch. Okay. Hello planning. Hello worry. Hello thought. Hello tension. Oh yeah, I'm a little tense in my shoulders. Right? So as you do those, you're cultivating your ability to pay attention in the present moment. You're cultivating that awareness, which is that first step of being aware of emotions in yourself and in others. Right? So that's a practice you can do almost every day as part of your meditation practice. Next, let's shift to regulating your state. How do you respond then to that feeling of fight or flight, these negative emotions? And I think there's really 3 tools you can use here. Number 1 is dissolving them. Number 2 is applying antidotes. And number 3 is shifting your physiology. Let's think about number 1, applying an antidote. That simply means that this idea that you can't have totally opposite experience of emotions at the same time, right? You can't at the same time want to just be upset, raging, ready to attack someone and be feeling like very peaceful and relaxed. That's just not how it works. So when you feel a strong negative emotion arise like anger or anxiety, you can actively cultivate an antidote to kind of push against it, right, and even out your experience. So an example, if you're feeling a little angry or tense, you might write down a few things you're grateful for, right? Very basic example. So we said apply antidotes. The second is to dissolve the emotion, and that simply means holding it in your awareness and labeling it. So just saying anger, there's anger, and just being cognizant of it and sort of allowing it to dissipate. And this is a thing that does take some practice, but it's really interesting how it works, because a lot of times when a strong emotion takes over, it takes us on autopilot. But then if we realize the moment we call attention to this negative emotion, it kind of loses this mysterious power over us, because all of a sudden we know what's driving us. If you say, I'm really like, maybe you're ruminating, right? You're thinking about something and you're like obsessing over these things, or I have to do this presentation and what could go wrong, and you'll say, oh, that's just anxiety. All of a sudden it's sort of like less magical, and you de-identify with the emotion, and you just realize, oh, it's just more thinking. It's just a feeling. So dissolving them that way helps you to de-identify with the emotion. And the third is changing your physiology. And what this means is a lot of time emotions are embodied. They're expressed within our mind and our body. And by changing our body, we can change our emotions. So a great example of this is what we've talked about is power posing, where maybe you're feeling a little tense and anxious. Do things that relax and make yourself bigger, and that will actually increase your testosterone, which is associated with greater confidence. You can also do something that I think one of my favorites comes from neuroscientist Andrew Huberman. He calls it a physiological sigh. And it's a specific type of breathing that helps to downregulate your kind of nervous system. And what it does is you take kind of one normal breath, and at the top of that breath, you take a big inhale through the nose, and then you sigh. And it's called a physiological sigh because there are these little alveoli sacs in your lungs that need a little bit of extra air pressure to inflate. And when you do this, it kind of inflates those, and then you breathe out, and it helps offload carbon dioxide. And so it's very effective to re-regulate yourself. And I'll do it for you real quick. A few of those. Anything you can do that by shifting your body, you can change your state. So that's a few strategies you have to now regulate your own state. Now finally, what are some social skills? How can we be more effective in managing others? And I'll share with you 5 quick rules that you can start to use as you think about your habits of how you communicate with others. The first is just to be genuinely interested in other people and frame things in terms of being about them. There's one thing that pretty much everyone is interested in above all else. It's endlessly fascinating. We spend 99% of our time thinking about it, and it is ourselves, yourself. We all see the world from a point of view where we're at the center of the universe. And so talking in terms of other people's interests, being genuinely interested in them, is a helpful frame as you think about your approach to conversations that helps to avoid conflict and make you more effective in managing people. The second is listen. This is very cliche, but a lot of times, we get in this position, and especially when in business or project updates where we have a lot going on, where we're so busy thinking about the things we have to say and how we're going to respond to what they're saying that we don't actually listen. So this goes back to the mindfulness and awareness skill set before. It's making sure that you are there just listening. And I'm not going to teach you some principles of like, oh, make sure you nod or do a certain gesture to show you're listening. You don't have to show you're listening if you're actually listening. If you actually remember to listen fully, you will be an active listener. You don't have to like do some special thing that makes it look like you're listening. Third rule, this changed my life. I still remember learning about it. The only way to win an argument is to avoid it. The only way to win an argument is to avoid it. And this, if you pay attention to your experience and remember your past experience, you'll find that this is true, right? Because when you argue, here one or two things can happen, right? Maybe you like really prove your point and you're really logical and you kind of convince the person they're wrong. Because their pride is hurt, they're still going to hold on to, they're not going to really want to do it. Maybe they even think you're right, which most of the time doesn't happen. Maybe they even think you're right, but they're not really fully committed or engaged. Or you don't convince them and it was pointless. I have, and if you've had this experience, you can ignore this part of the video and I won't be offended. I, in my whole life, have never once got into a heated argument, gone back and forth, and finally said something that totally disproved the other person, and they said, you know what? Your argument was right, I'm wrong. I totally made a mistake, and I think you're right. It's just not how it goes. Usually arguments do not go that well. You're much better off asking questions, framing things as a discussion, and not sort of arguing directly. The last couple. This one is try to avoid criticizing, condemning, complaining. And it's not that you can't be critical of people, but again, it's how you frame it, right? Because some people are going to suggest stupid ideas. I've suggested plenty of stupid ideas. Some people are going to want actual feedback on how they can improve. But what we're more getting at here is just we have this negativity bias, right? It's much easier to see what's going wrong than going right. You know, your kid comes home with, think about your child comes home with a report card that has an F on it, right? How do you react? Your attention goes right there. But what if all the other grades were A's and B's? You're probably not, right? If you have 4 A's and 1 F, you're not going to give 4 times as much positive feedback and 1 round of negative feedback, right? That's not how your mind works. It's going to be 10 times, you got a couple A's and B's. Who cares? We want to talk about this F. Dude, that's just how we're wired. So try to avoid being critical. Everyone on earth wants to be appreciated, to recognize what they've done right. We're all yearning for this, like food and water and shelter. And while most of us, thank goodness, have food, water, and shelter, most of us don't have that feeling of being appreciated all that often. So if you can do this, you can turn people into gold. And the last one I think is very helpful is always assume least malice. And this comes up a lot at work, especially with communication. Someone doesn't answer your email. Someone doesn't get back to you about something. And you tend to think they're ignoring you. Or did I piss them off or something? Probably 85% of the time, someone just forgot to do something. Someone started typing the email and didn't hit send. Always, 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 just assume least malice. Even if someone says something to you that sounds like an insult or like a slight, oftentimes it's just a mistake. Always assume these good motives, and that'll help you go pretty far. So there's a few principles we now went through of how to do this. We begin with this mindfulness and awareness training. You have some practices to regulate your state, some practices for your communication style and social skills. And so you start to make all of those things. Think about those in terms of habits. Can I make a habit around training my awareness, my mindfulness? Can I make some habits about when emotions arise that I do a physiological sigh? Or I change my posture, or I cultivate gratitude. You think about social skills. Can I try to be more interested in people and frame things about them? Make sure I'm listening, avoid arguing, avoid criticism, assuming least malice. Right? You have a solid foundation now for how to do this. And I think by now you understand, right, with the neuroscience perspective and ultimately why this is so important with my little crystal ball exercise and the connection to business and organizational outcomes and happiness. You have everything you need to know now to start training your emotional intelligence, and I hope that this video has helped you do so.